Next up, we have Nicholas Petit-Frere, the offensive lineman, offensive tackle out of Ohio State, who, as you guys can see, I'm just not quite as high on as it seems as though everybody else is. For me, it just felt like pretty much every area of his game could use some significant improvement, in my opinion. Not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but to me, I would classify him more as a developmental project than necessarily some top pick that I would want in, say, the first, second, or third round. In terms of some of the good, I think that his frame is solid. 6'5", 316. I think he has a workable frame. I think in terms of some of his footwork, particularly against the run, I thought you saw a little bit of agility. I thought you saw a little bit of quickness. I like that out of him. Although I will say I didn't quite see a ton of physicality as a run blocker, which if you're going to be a team that wants to really run the ball between the tackles and get him going on a ton of base blocks and down blocks and drive blocks, I don't quite know if Petit-Frere is the guy for you. He was a little bit better, in my opinion, on some of the more mobile, like reach blocks, for example, where it's more about foot positioning and getting a good angle on a guy rather than just being able to overpower him and get him off the line of scrimmage. Right, and Petit-Frere wasn't the type of guy that was reestablishing the line of scrimmage downfield, really much at all from the games that I watched and the snaps that I evaluated. In that regard, I gave him a 4 out of 10 on physicality and finishing, which was one of my lower grades in that category, as well as a 3 out of 10 on power and strength. I just didn't really see it with the strength in any regard as far as really generating movement as a run blocker or in terms of with his hands as a pass blocker. I thought at times he was struggling to anchor as a pass blocker, which I guess we'll go straight to that grade. To me, that was really where he could use a good bit of work, just pass pro. I grade pass pro generally out of 25 points. I gave Petit-Frere a 15, which unfortunately was the lowest grade that I gave any of the 25 tackles that I've done over the last 2 drafts here. He was tied for last with Tevin Jenkins out of Oklahoma State last year. So in that regard, I just think there's a lot of work to be done. In terms of particularly what is that work, I thought his pass set was very flat, I would say. What I mean by that is instead of kicking back at a 45-degree angle, or some teams more in college than the NFL, they'll work vertical sets where they're more so dropping back straight backwards. Petit-Frere was setting more laterally than anything. It's more like a 30-degree angle than a 45-degree angle, and it really put him in a questionable position, particularly against speed rushers. He was getting beat upfield and really struggling to latch onto them, and run the hoop with them. It felt like he just needed to work on gaining more depth with his initial foot positioning and then working back that track from there. But as is, he felt like the type of guy that would get absolutely eaten alive by NFL speed rushers because, frankly, it was happening at college. There were reps at both left tackle and then some at right tackle in one game after number 79 got injured. They moved Petit-Frere over to the right side, which that was a little bit strange, I'll be honest. Generally, you don't move your left tackle around, but perhaps they had a backup left tackle that was better than the backup right tackle. I'm not entirely sure, but I saw it on both sides. It seemed like an issue for him on both sides, where he would be really flat with his initial step, sort of get beat to the spot, and then be left sort of lunging and chasing after guys from there for the most part. And he just didn't seem to quite have the foot quickness, in my opinion, to recover at that point, at least working backwards. It seemed as though, when he was working some of those reach blocks and climbing to the second level and things, it seemed like he was fine, but for some reason as a pass blocker, it just didn't really seem there to me. I thought that another thing that really hurt him was his usage of length. Now, he has decently long arms, 33.625-inch arms. If you had 36-inch arms, this might be a whole different story, but no, regardless, at 33.625, to me, he was letting guys into his chest too much as well, so maybe when those guys that were lined up wide decided to bend it back inside and try and convert that speed to power, it felt like Petit-Frere's timing on his punches was a little bit behind. He was kind of a step late to it, to where Yes, he has decently long arms. His arms are a fine length to be a starting tackle in the league, but if you're not throwing those punches until guys are 10 inches away, then you could have 100-inch arms and it doesn't matter. You're not making a big enough dent in them, and then it's just left to you being able to anchor in pass pro. And like I said earlier, he didn't really do the best job there. I did think, I kind of already mentioned it, better as a run blocker. I gave him a 10.5 out of 15 because, again, I thought he had some solid understanding, it seemed as though, of the footwork and angles required, and he could position block guys well in terms of getting between them and the ball carrier, right? So it's not as though his guys were making plays that often, but he also wasn't driving guys off the ball either. So for me, what I would say you have to do with a guy like Petit-Frere is really like give him almost a redshirt year where you work to sort of tear down some of the bad habits and work on, over the course of that next summer and into that next season, work up some good habits. But I don't think all hope is lost because, like I said, he has a good frame. He has some decent athleticism. I thought climbing to the second level, there was, good initial burst there. I just didn't see that burst in pass pro with his footwork. I think he has it, but his sets are really, really short. So instead of like moving his feet a significant length, like the depth was not quite what it needed to be, in my opinion. So I would say work on things like that, which aren't quite as easy to fix as it might sound. I know as somebody who was an offensive lineman for 17 years, I can tell you that like that was an issue that I had at times, just the positioning of that foot in terms of, setting it too far laterally opposed to more diagonally, as well as getting good depth on it so that way you can easily meet those guys at the spot, which at this point I didn't quite think he was doing on a consistent basis. But put him in a good offensive line room, maybe put him behind a veteran. That's something that I generally suggest for some of these later round guys, at least in my opinion, later round caliber guys. Just pair them up with a good polished veteran who can kind of show them the ropes, and at that point it's going to be sink or swim from there, right? Are you going to be able to handle some critique and criticism and work on your game, or are you going to unfortunately sink in that regard, right? The only other thing I did want to mention in terms of one grade that I thought was decently positive was his IQ and awareness in terms of being able to recognize some stunts and twists before they happened. I thought that was generally solid and one of the better things about his game. So now we just need to apply some of that IQ and whatnot into working through his own issues at times, because it seemed like he sometimes had the defense figured out. Now we just have to figure out Nicholas Petit-Frere, and in that regard, I'll be excited to see where he goes in the NFL draft. I'm thinking maybe late day 2, early day 3, but we will have to see. I would say for me, I really do think 5th round. That's where I would feel comfortable taking him. If he goes earlier, I get it. There are some decent traits here, but I think that there's some work that has to be done. And frankly, he was the lowest tackle that I graded. If I hadn't said that already, at least this year. And yeah, I would say to me he's more of a developmental project than anything. But hey, that's still something, right? So get him in a room, get him with somebody, get him some good some good coaching, and in a good position group as a whole where there's some veteran leadership maybe, and go from there. So with that being said, it's really all I have for you guys in this one. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe, comment, all those great things. If you didn't enjoy because your team perhaps took Petit-Frere way earlier than I would have taken him myself, I wouldn't fret too hard about that, because maybe your team's grading on a different criteria than I am, right? Maybe they're valuing the just raw intangibles at a much higher rate than I am, where I'm looking more at some of the more nuanced, polished stuff, right? Because that's how I would describe Pierre. I would say some solid traits, but not necessarily the most polished guy. So maybe your team has a good, O-line coach and a good offensive coordinator, and they think they can work with what he has, and in that regard, I hope they're right. So that now is all I have for you guys in this one. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Peace, guys.